Hello, podcast listeners. I am thrilled to have my dear friend and one of the original Canine Conversation podcast co-hosts, an amazing colleague, Ursa Acree, on the show today. So welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like we're getting the band back together.
Yes. Oh, and shout out to Kayla Pratt.
Yes. Shout out to Kayla, who's actually on a bike ride in my neighborhood right now. So she'll be back probably any minute.
Tell her to pop on it into the show.
Wave in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited to talk about the topic. And this was Ursa's idea, and I love it. I love all things Ursa. And today's show is about rethinking obedience. What are we really training for? And so I think we should start off the conversation with the definition of obedience. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all talking about the same thing. Because one thing that, I always tell people is I train pet dogs. I don't do like competition obedience and that sort of thing. So
Same.
Generally, if I'm talking about obedience, it's reflecting my client's idea of obedience, which is like basic training.
Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about competition obedience today. We're talking about, like you said, like the general understanding of what obedience is. But the dictionary says that the word obedience means compliance with an order, request. I was surprised request was there because I feel like order and request are very different.
Right.
But it's compliance with an order, request, or law or submission to another's authority. And so as I read that definition, I was reminded how powerful our language can be. And when we think or speak certain words or phrases, they have the power to influence our behavior and our expectations regarding our dogs and their behavior. So with that said, Ursa, what seems problematic about this word obedience and like some of the elements within that definition?
Yeah, well, I feel like for one thing, it doesn't really jibe with the modern idea of how we relate to our dogs in a training context, right? Mm-hmm. So for trainers like us who focus on, call it what you want, force-free, positive reinforcement based training, we're not in it to set up the training to make the dog feel like do this or else, right? So we actively try to avoid those situations where the dog feels compelled or coerced to do something. And our focus is on getting them to be a cooperative partner in the training, and giving them agency and giving them choice and helping them feel like we're doing this together. This isn't being done to you, we're doing it together. And so I think that, the word obedience comes with some psychological baggage that reflects this definition. It's do it or else. And that is really reflective of the more sort of an older paradigm for training, the old style of dog training where you ask the dog to do something, and if they don't do it, they get a correction, whether that's leash correction or a verbal or shock collar or whatever. And so, even though many of my clients use obedience as a shorthand to mean, I just want my dog to do what I ask, the word is very weighted in that older style of training. That's okay, do what I ask or else something bad is going to happen to you. And so I try to avoid using it myself, when I'm talking to clients, because I do think, like you said, what the language we use matters. And so I don't say, give your dog the command. I say, give the cue or ask for this behavior, whatever. And so generally speaking, when I'm talking about, basic training, I also don't use the word obedience because I do feel like it comes with all of those connotations. Although I don't tend to correct my clients if they say it. I'm not like, oh, well, you said obedience, but I just kind of let them, that's shorthand for them to mean like, I just want my dog to be well-mannered. So.
Yeah. And I think that, there's some other challenges that go along with this idea of having that lens of obedience, this whole like do it or else. It really does set unrealistic expectations in terms of like how the behavior modification or how behavior change process even works, right? Like you can have a dog engaging in specific behaviors to avoid something unpleasant, and that can be your contingency. But gosh, there's so many more elements to it where we really want to motivate the dog to be doing specific behaviors, or we want to be, like you said, a collaborative partner and meeting their needs so that they are engaging in the choices that we are wanting of them. And I think it's really important for us to take ownership that we are expecting certain behaviors from them. That doesn't mean that they subscribe to that, right? Like it's our expectation
Yep.
and it's our desires, and we all can't get what we desire at any given moment, right? Whether it's with a relationship with our canine or human relationships.
In literally any context.
In literally any context. It's we're so sorry to say, and I'm the most disappointed about it.
Real
right?
talk.
So
yeah,
I do feel like being really mindful that like it's a request. It is a cue. It is asking, like you said. And you're asking your partner in this whether or not they can engage in that particular behavior. And so
right.
Yeah. So what were you going to say?
And no, that's okay. I think another facet of this unrealistic expectation is if we approach training with this idea of I'm going to make my dog do this, they have to do it, they don't have a choice, then we tend to look at our dogs as these robots, right? That are just input output that we can control, that we can, make them do whatever we want. And that is, again, like you said, it's so unrealistic because they are living, breathing creatures that have their own desires and their own internal emotional states and preferences and, et cetera. And so approaching the training relationship with the thought that, well, I'm just going to get what I want every single time, totally shuts you off from recognizing your dog as this individual in their own right. So I think, and then just also ignoring that learning is a process and it requires trial and error, and that nobody's going to get it right every time or the first time or sometimes even very quickly. And so having the expectation, and this happens a lot with my clients, that we'll we'll be practicing a certain skill and the dog is just nailing it, right? Like they just get it right out of the gate and we do, 10, 15 reps and they're perfect. And they're like, great, they've got it.
Yeah,
perfect.
Totally.
And it's like, no. Like this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so I think that anytime we get those snappy, quick, compliant results, we tend to think like, okay, the dog knows it, my work here is done. Anything past this, if they don't do it right, it's because they're being stubborn or disobedient or whatever. And so again, that all feeds into these unrealistic expectations for what we can expect from our dogs.
Yeah. And it doesn't really highlight that like behavior is a product of the environment. And there's so many variables that are contributing to whether or not the dog is engaging in the behavior or not. Right. And so
absolutely,
like, again, just another unrealistic expectation, not only of your dog, but of, like you mentioned, the process. And it's, speaking of our clients, I have this one client where we were teaching her dog to go mouth a hanging tug toy instead of mouthing the other dog in the home. So during these moments of transition or arousal, we were asking him to grab onto the tug toy instead of his sister, right? And so we got it. Like, I'm just thinking about your example. He loves this tug toy. It's like the end of a flirt pole. We wound up wrapping it on the banister or whatever. It was so reinforcing for him to go put his mouth on this toy. Right. And so we started to add the verbal cue. He was doing it, like you said, really, really fast out of the gate. Great. And I said to them, okay, I'm going to send you a systematic plan to build up to the point when we have moments of transition and when we want him to redirect away from the other dog onto the tug toy. And I'm like, I want you to avoid and do our management strategy in the meantime. And it's like, she sent me a text, obviously. And she was like, so I did exactly what you told me not to do. And
I love the honesty though.
Oh, I totally loved the honesty. And she was like, so we decided to, we left the house, we came back. It was a moment of arousal and transition. And he went after the other dog in the home. And so we wound up cueing it. And she's like, and it worked. And I was like, well, that's amazing. And I want you to know that you got lucky and that it's gotta be so reinforcing for that dog to engage in that particular behavior, right? Like, it's not that it's the magical cue that we put on, or it's not that you did the 15 repetitions with me in person. It is that like that activity is reinforcing or more so clearly than hanging on his sister. Right. And it wasn't in an aggressive way. It was just it was a rough, challenging way that he would engage with her that she didn't appreciate. Right. And so, yeah, I find that like, you're right that when you get these really quick, fast movements and these behaviors right out of the gate, everyone's like, oh, the dog's got it.
Yep.
Now I'm going to be able to tell them what to do whenever I want. Yep. Oh, they're not doing it now. And then therefore they're stubborn, fill in the blank label.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we sort of assume this fluency very quickly. And then we assume that any lack of fluency is the dog's choice. Yep. Oh, well, they showed me that they could do it in context A and they're not doing it in context B. So they're clearly being stubborn. They're blowing me off. They're whatever. When really it's a lack of fluency from the beginning, because I think as humans, we always want to move forward and progress, and we want to do it quickly. And it's hard to see sometimes the value in repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again, so that you build this super strong foundation of fluency in a very simple behavior before you ask the dog to do it in a harder context. And it seems like you're doing the same thing for no reason, but what it actually is it's building that muscle memory and building the dog's fluency so that they can do it. I tell my clients, it's a lot like, and if you have a kid, I think you can relate easily to this. My son's in first grade and he's, learning basic math, right? Like addition, subtraction, that sort of stuff, counting by tens, counting by 20s. And like, if we're sitting at home at the dinner table and we play a little game, I can be like, okay, what's 5 + 7? What's 10 times 2, whatever. But like, I would never take him to the playground, where there's like 20 kids running around and be like, okay, quick, let's do some math,
Like, it's like, see you later.
I mean, like, it's hard for adults that I know to do math under pressure.
Yeah, that's really true.
So, but nobody would say like, oh, why are these first graders doing their multiplication tables over and over and over and over and over again? Nobody thinks of it like that. They go, well, obviously they're doing like hundreds of repetitions so that it becomes second nature. But with our dogs, we think like 10 reps are enough, Yeah,
it's so interesting. I wonder if that's just because like in general, our society is just like quick fix. Everything is really, really fast, right? Like get it done, make it better. Right. Yeah. And so I wonder if that plays a role into this assumption.
I also think that some of it has to do with how we view dogs. Like, even though, and I know that there is criticism about how people treat their dogs like children. And like, I don't care how people treat their pets as long as they do it kindly. Like, I don't care if you call it a fur baby or your child or whatever, like I don't mind at all. But I think that really most people see their dogs as like little tiny adult humans in terms of cognition and emotional level. They assign more of an adult human level to their dog. And so they assume like, well, if I get it, my dog gets it, we're done here, right? They don't think of it as teaching a 7-year-old how to do math, which of course any reasonable adult would sit down with 7-year-old and do hundreds of repetitions, but we don't think of that way with our dogs. I think we think of them as more mature and so therefore able to learn more quickly. But they're learning they're learning all these things that they have no context for. That are not natural behaviors for them in a lot of cases. So, which kind of, you made a point about like making them do unnatural behaviors. The obedience sort of framework can sometimes really force dogs to do things that aren't supernatural for them. Supernatural aren't very natural.
Supernatural.
I've never been able to teach a dog to do something supernatural. That would
Yeah.
be cool. But one that comes to mind that like is a little bit of a pet peeve for me is the compulsive eye contact.
Oh my gosh.
So like make the dog look at you and don't let
Yes.
them look away while there's something else going on.
Yeah.
And especially in cases where the dog is worried. So like reactive dogs,
Yeah.
if they're worried about something coming towards them, I hate that.
Yep.
Because I'm like, what if you were in a room with something like a room full of snakes? I'm not scared of snakes, but like I'm terrified of heights. So if somebody backed me up to the edge of a cliff and was like, don't look, you can't turn
Yeah.
around and look how close you are, I would panic. I would have
Panic.
a meltdown. I
Yeah.
would absolutely panic.
And could
So
you imagine if you then turned to look to like gauge your own self-preservation and then you got corrected for that?
oh my God. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. I would,
Like,
I would panic.
next level hell.
And so it's not a natural behavior to force a dog not to like check something out that they're either distracted by or worried about or, whatever. Like things like that are just not normal natural behaviors for dogs. And so when we take that abnormal behavior that makes no sense to a dog and put it in the context of do it, like you said, do it or else I'm going to correct you, feels really unfair.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about a few other terms that are sort of within this family, and we hear clients bring this up often. And you have really good definitions or explanations in terms of how you talk to your clients about this. But, a lot of our clients that come to us and they want a well-trained dog, right? I'm doing air quotes, right? And so you were talking the difference between like, what is a well-trained dog versus a well-behaved dog. And so I'd love to hear share your definitions with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk and think about this a lot. So I generally think of a well-trained dog as a dog that will do what you ask when you ask them, right? So you have good stimulus control, you have low latency, you have good fluency. When you ask your dog to come, they come. When you ask your dog to sit, they sit, wait, whatever. And I think of a well-behaved dog as a dog that is just easy to live with because they do these things without being asked. So for example, I think the SMART times 50 approach, I talk a lot with my clients about that. So SMART times 50, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is basically the idea that at the beginning of each day, you're going to count out 50 little pieces of kibble or treats or whatever. And throughout the day, you're going to catch your dog offering behaviors that you either like or at least can tolerate, right? So I always say to my clients, if you look at your dog and you're like, that's fine or better, then you can yes or mark them and hand them a treat. And I only do it with behaviors that the dog offers. And the reason is dogs learn that they have some responsibility in the relationship to offer these behaviors that have been reinforced in the past, that they can, and I say responsibility, maybe that's not the right word, but it motivates them to go, oh, I can do this without being asked. I can sit and wait at the door without anybody telling me to do it. I can lay down near the dinner table without anybody telling me to do it, and I still will get reinforced for it.
Yeah.
And so to me, how we teach the dog to do things can make a big difference between being well-trained and well-behaved. So a well-trained dog is one that will do what you ask, but you always have to ask. And a well-behaved dog is one that has been, we've developed this relationship where they understand what behaviors are going to be reinforced and they do them on their own. And I feel like everybody wants that second one, right? Because all of the clients I talk to, we go through these exercises and skills building to help their dogs make better choices. And almost always I get the question of like, well, when will they do it on their own? Right? How long will I have to keep asking my dog to do it? And of course, the answer is it depends, like it is with everything. But everybody wants that dog that just makes the right choice on their own. And so I feel the traditional obedience paradigm will never get us there, because I shouldn't say that. I don't think that it gets us there in the way that most people truly want, because I don't think most people actually want a robot dog. I think they want a pet and a partner, but they don't understand that you don't have to use that do it or else style of training to get the dog that you want, that's well behaved, that's a joy to live with.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it totally does. And I would agree with what you're saying. And I feel like the obedience style, it's a lot of just talking at the dog, right? It
Yeah.
just, we are always, instead of us thinking about it through the lens that we are a sliver of the environment, and that environment is cueing behavior all the time, whether we're involved or not, right? Like I always joke with my clients. It's just like, oh, like let's prepare your ego for the blow, right? Like you are not the only thing in the environment that is cueing behavior, but we feel like our verbal cues are the thing, right? And
Be all end all. Yeah.
Be all end all. And so I think that lens of obedience, when you're constantly telling your dog and barking orders at them, you're right, it doesn't get them to like the whole idea of, oh, everybody's sitting down to dinner. I've had a ton of reinforcement history on my bed. They've made it worth my while to be here instead of at the table. I'm actually going to proactively go lay down on the bed as they bring things over to the table, because chances are I'm going to get reinforcement over there, right? Like that's what you're talking about. That whole the environment cues the dog to actually do the behavior. So I do agree with you. I think people want that. I don't think people are like, I can't wait to just 20 times a day bark an order at my dog. That's not why we got dogs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think, I said it never gets you there, but that's not true, because we know that coercion and the threat of punishment can certainly change behavior.
It does change behavior. You're right.
But the difference is, if you're focusing on catching the dog doing it wrong, you're much less likely to create a dog that offers a variety of behaviors that you can then select your favorites. And build the behaviors that you want that make it easy to live with your dog, So it's a lot less work too, to say like, okay, well, every time my dog does one of these 5 behaviors, I'm going to make sure they're reinforced for it. And then these are the 5 behaviors that I'm going to get most often, as opposed to like, well, these are the 2 things I want my dog to do, or the 5 things I want my dog to do. And if they do anything else, I'm going to correct them.
Yeah.
And I'm exaggerating a little, but the difference in paradigm is stark for sure.
Yeah, it is stark.
And I think that generally speaking, if we view things through a traditional obedience lens of like, well, we're going to teach this sit down, stay, blah, 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 whatever, and be very strict about it, I don't think it gets us. I think maybe in letter, it can get us to what we feel is a well-behaved dog, but it doesn't get us there in spirit.
Yeah. And I'm so reminded of a client. I'm going to share a vulnerable story, because this is one time where we decided we were not the right match.
Right? Yeah.
Which is hard, right? Because I went down like a whole shame spiral and imposter syndrome, but I do know that trainers listen to this podcast and I want to share it. The one time I was like, quote unquote, fired, right? There was this lovely young woman who had very, very, very like young adolescent white shepherd. And the dog was living in a situation with a bunch of roommates, and the dog was really having a hard time living in that environment. And it was my first training session there. She couldn't put the dog away when people would come into the house, because he would like be very stressed by that. But if people came over to the house, he would get, he'd be really conflicted with them. And so we were sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I remember asking her behavior history, like getting an understanding of like what she was dealing with, what some of the roadblocks we were up against. And we were trying to design a management strategy so that when her roommates invited people over, which I mean, honestly, that wasn't the best choice for this dog. Like the living environment was not ideal. What could she do when roommates were over? And I remember brainstorming a management strategy. And after the session, she called me and she's like, I just don't understand why we didn't do training. And she had come from a trainer in this area that has the dog do rep after rep after rep in like an hour-long obedience class, right? Where like the dog is just sit down, stay, like just constant reps. And she's like, I don't understand why you need all that information. I don't understand why we're talking things through. Like, why didn't you come here and show me how to train my dog? And I'm like, oh, so interesting. Like, I so get that your previous learning history is just make the dog do stuff.
Drills. Yeah. Yeah. Make the dog do stuff.
Drills is the appropriate word. And we came to the conclusion, like, we're just not the right fit, because I'm not going to do drills with your dog when your dog's clearly uncomfortable by like all things. Right.
Right.
So yeah, that was like coming from a little bit more of the obedience perspective of like, make your dog do behaviors and that will solve all the things.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I feel like behavior mod as a practice. So like the treatment of problem behaviors and, and addressing like the environmental conditions and the emotions that are driving these behaviors is a much newer practice than obedience, right?
Yep.
So I think, in at some point when we as a society said like, oh, well, we're going to try to help these dogs that are aggressive or fearful or anxious or whatever, the only tools that were available were like, oh, well, the obedience that we've always done, right?
Yep.
We just need to do that more and harder. Like,
it's like,
right. It's like not knowing the language in a foreign country. Just repeat yourself, but louder, right?
Yeah.
And eventually you'll be loud enough that someone will understand you.
Exactly.
So I think that some of that still hangs around I think it has to do with the idea that problem behaviors are the dog being dominant, stubborn, problematic, blah, 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 whatever. And what's the solution? Of obedience, make them do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely a lot going on. But yeah, I definitely have clients where, I'll be seeing them for stranger aggression, for example. And, I think we probably do our sessions very similarly. So I start with management, we're going to stop the bleeding, and then we teach skills, whatever skills we feel we need. And then we take those skills and we move them into the triggering scenario slowly so that the dog can learn to make better choices. But I definitely have had clients that are like, well, aren't we going to do like sit down, stay, whatever? And I'm well, what do you need those things? Well, I thought that would, help my dog be, more comfortable with strangers or whatever. And they see obedience as the way to address these problem issues. And I really do think it boils down to like thinking about problem behavior as the dog just being difficult as opposed to having a hard time. But it's really funny. This happens to me fairly often too. I've trained tons of basic manners, but I don't do much of it with the clients that I see now because again, we're doing behavior mod. And so it just depends on what skills I think the dog needs. But inevitably, the client will say like, well, aren't we going to teach my dog to do a stay or whatever? And I'm like, well, what for what? Like, what do you want your dog to stay for? Like, where do you envision yourself needing this behavior? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just thought that's what you did.
Yeah,
like,
you did. Exactly.
Aren't you supposed to teach your dog to stay? And I'm like, only if you want to, like, but full disclosure, my dog doesn't stay.
Me neither. I always tell my clients, I'm like, Sully doesn't know how to stay.
No.
I don't really ever need it.
I can think of maybe, I'm down to one dog now, Zip, and she's 13 and she's pretty much a potato at this point. She's enjoying her golden years. But I could think of like maybe 2 times in the decade that I've had her that I was like, I really wish she could understand stay right now. And usually it was some scenario that I could never have predicted. Like, I need to get out the door with an armload of stuff, but I really don't want her to go out because then I'm going to have to chase her down and put her back inside. And really weird. Yeah. So
like stuff that you could easily manage, exactly. Right? Like it's,
yes. And so like, why would I teach her to stay? If it's a behavior that you use, then absolutely, but not just for the sake of doing it, There's more fun stuff to teach just for the sake of teaching, for sure.
Yes.
But
and then everybody always screws up their stay anyway, because they put the dog in the stay and then they walk backwards and they say
50 feet away.
50 feet away. And then they call them to come. And then they reinforce for coming, right?
Yes. I know.
So we get a dog that's like getting ready to pop up, right?
Yes,
Anyway.
absolutely. Well, so to circle back to, what we were talking about, which is this idea of well-trained versus well-behaved, I
Mhm.
certainly think we can have both. But I think the approach of like sort of traditional obedience, and honestly, like just a fixation on this sort of menu of behaviors that every dog has to know, like I just don't think that gets us to well-behaved the way that we
Yeah.
really want it to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I would say that, like, I mean, Ursa and I are obviously not saying that we want to avoid training altogether, right? Like
no.
instead, we're really asking folks to have, well, one, have a perspective of that this is a dialogue, right?
Mhm.
Rather than a monologue, but to look at what is it that you need for your dog and in your particular environment, in your situation, right? What are those life skills that you need to teach the dog? And then work from there, right?
Mhm.
Instead of just saying, like you said, I have a menu of behaviors. I have a lot
Mhm.
of puppy clients are like, wait, I don't understand. When are we going to get to leave it? And you're like, okay, well, right. And none of it is wrong, right? I mean, everybody
Right.
understands that they look at a PetSmart class or any other 6-week class, and all those behaviors are listed there, and none of those behaviors are
Sure.
wrong. We're not saying they're wrong. Um,
Yeah.
when we're working with a dog and a client one-on-one, it's so critical for us as behavior consultants to say, like, what is it that you as individuals need, and let's
Mhm.
determine a plan from there,
Mhm.
instead of just drilling in the
This
top
is
10
the recipe that
behaviors.
every dog. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I think of it too about like, there are the skills that are the outcome, and then there's also the learning process.
Hmm.
And so I imagine you would agree that like the process is just as important as the end result.
Yep.
So, again, like to kind of tie it back to my analogy with kids, like just because I can say to my son, what's 5 plus 5? And he can tell me 10, like the fact that he can tell me the right answer is less important than that he knows how to get it. Cause he could just guess. He could be like, I don't know, 10.
Hmm.
And like, and you guess right sometimes, but like the process of learning is so much more important so that he can take that framework and apply it to other things. And I think that teaching basic skills, to me, what's really important and really powerful in those basic skills is that they're easy ways for us to build a training and learning relationship with our dog regardless of what we teach them.
Hmm.
So, like, sure, teach a stay. Like, that's even if you don't necessarily need the behavior, you can certainly teach it. But I wouldn't say teach it because you think you need your dog to stay for 20 minutes or whatever. Clients always have these ridiculous, like, I don't know, I think we need to teach him to stay for like half an hour. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
But so the behavior isn't necessarily the point to me. It's
Hmm.
that process of teaching your dog how to learn, of building a relationship and a dialogue between you and your dog,
Hmm.
teaching them that they can offer behavior and be reinforced for it without being asked, and that their behavior can have an effect on the world around them. So that gives them more of a sense of agency and builds confidence. And I think that to me, that's the real value in those little sort of traditional skills, the menu of the 10 things. It's that they're easy, they're simple, and we can use them as a way to build this broader training relationship and really enrich our dogs' lives, enrich the dialogue that we have with them, and then also to practice our skills too, because if you're not a dog trainer and these things are new to you, you don't want to start with really hard stuff either. You want to start with
Hmm.
stuff that's really easy. So absolutely, no, I would never tell somebody not to train, but just let's think about like, what's the point here? Is the
Yeah.
point to get your dog to do a 5-minute down stay, or is the point to help your dog learn how to learn and learn how to pick up on your signals, and and for you to observe them and gather their communication? Like, to me, that's the point.
Yeah. And it's like nobody, I mean, not most people that we work with didn't get a dog to be a dog trainer. right? And
Right.
so yeah, this whole process can be hard. So instead of just doing like the 10 behaviors, it's like what's
Mhm.
really important to them. And I love this analogy of, your son doing math, like, and I love this idea of like teaching a client a framework, right? It reminds me of like, there are sometimes, depending on how long I've worked with a client,
Mhm.
where if I don't do this enough, and I'm wondering if you're prompting me to do this more, where we've worked on something in one context and then another challenge comes up and the client goes, well, how do I handle this? And instead of
Yes.
me going, okay, this is how we're going to do it, I almost wonder if I should start to ask my clients like, okay, so we start with a management strategy, right? We had a management strategy for the
Mhm.
for the other behavior. What would be a management strategy here, right? Trying
Mhm.
to really prompt the client to answer some of these questions so that, again, it's this framework they have for life.
Right.
It's not just
Yes.
they're guessing like, oh, maybe I'll
Yep.
just,
Yep.
I don't know, teach sit or something like, right? They actually have like a framework to lean on that they could then maybe solve future problems like collaboratively with their
Mhm.
dog. So
Yeah.
I like this
I
idea
love
of like prompting more.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like so often our clients build these skills that we're teaching them into these silos where they're like,
Yes. Yes.
okay, so I learned this skill for this exact problem in this exact context. And then something similar pops up and they're like, I don't know what to do.
Oh my gosh. And same with dogs, right? And so it's like just
Yes.
because you taught us it in the living room does not mean
Right.
it's happening at the dog park, right? So yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I mean, what you're saying is exactly right. Like, if we can help them use, basic training or teaching these basic skills or whatever as a way to understand how to interact with their dog and how to encourage learning and, in the way that they want, then they can, I think that that can help them extrapolate when these situations come up, as they inevitably do, that we haven't directly coached them on, because
Mhm.
it's like literally like I had a client a while back and it was we're working on reactivity, right? And so we
Mhm.
practiced in the park with dogs, like working on reactivity with dogs. Dog was doing great. I get a text from her, well, a bike went by today and dog just went, no, I don't know what to do with bikes. I'm like, it's the
Yeah.
same
It's
thing.
the
It's
same thing. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And like we love our
And that's my
clients,
failure. That is my failure for not
right?
helping her generalize that. But I guess, there are definitely times where I overlook it because to me it's so obvious. Like,
Totally,
this is
totally.
for
Yeah.
anything. This is for anything your dog wants to bark at.
Yes. Yes.
So I think, building that foundation of using basic obedience, basic manners as a tool for helping start the dialogue between a person and their dog and learn how to learn from each other is the real value. So
Mhm.
as opposed to just teaching the dog to sit for their food bowl or whatever. I mean, there's value in that too, because then you don't get kibble all over the floor. But
Yeah.
and that's funny. That's an interesting. That actually kind of makes me think of, and I think, God, I swear we've talked about this in the past, like on canine conversations. There are certain obedience behaviors that my clients are almost universally good at, right? Without my help. And that one of them is sit and wait for the food bowl, right? So
Yep.
almost every single client I talk to, when I go, what does your dog already know? They go, well, they sit and wait for their food for me to put it down. And then I say, okay, you can have it.
Oh my gosh,
And it's
Ursa,
so,
you're so right. I don't think we
right?
talked
Every
about that
single
on
one.
the previous
Oh
podcast.
no. I feel like I talk
Interesting.
about this all the time. And it's because it's really important to them that their
Yeah.
dog doesn't mug them as they're putting the food bowl down, because it's
Yeah.
unpleasant, it's messy, it's rude, like they don't like it, which is totally fair, like totally fair. And so I always point out, like, if you can take that energy, like that, because how did you teach your dog to do that, right? You
Mhm.
were really consistent.
Mhm.
Your timing was really good. So if they got up, the food bowl went away. And you did it twice a day, every
Yeah,
single day.
yeah.
And now,
Yep.
right? And so we just have to take that energy of being consistent and clear and putting in the work. And we can do anything with that, right?
Mhm.
You've shown you can do it with one thing, and we can do it with anything. So
Yeah.
Kind of a little tangent, but it just made me think of that.
No, but you're right. I never actually, yeah, it's like that, or like leaving a treat in front of their paw.
Yes,
Right.
leave
Like
it, leave it.
Yeah, that, or I mean, sit is usually easy. But yeah,
Waiting at the door sometimes is
waiting at the door
another one, or
sometimes. Yep.
sitting at the curb. Oh my God. People love to make their dogs sit at the curb before they cross the street.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
ones that are a mess is always come.
oh yeah,
that one's always a mess.
Too many variables, and I think we try. Everybody tries to go too fast, too soon.
Too fast,
you know.
Too soon,
yeah. Well, my dog can come to me in the living room when I call them over for a head scratch. So we're gonna go to the dog park.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna let them get involved in wrestling with 5 other dogs and then try to call them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, too big of a jump in criteria.
So we've touched upon this throughout the conversation, but why do you think the concept of obedience, like the less modern approach, right, is important to so many people?
I think there are multiple reasons that we hang on to this. And I think probably most people come from a place of wanting their dog to be safe, right? I really do think like the clients that I work with are the best people in the world. They love their dogs. And they're devoted to their dogs. And even if they don't know everything they need to know or do everything they need to do, they're really trying.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, there's at least some element of, I just want my dog to be safe. So like if they run out the door, I want to be able to call them back. Or, if they pick up something that's dangerous for them to eat, I want them to spit it out. Or sometimes they want to keep the people in their lives safe. So like, I don't want my 100-pound dog to jump on grandma when she's walking through the door. Or I don't even, we could extrapolate that to behavior issues. Like I want my dog not to be aggressive because I don't want them to be taken away from me. And so it comes from a place of care, but I also think that there is very much an element of control, right? And that comes from, again, sort of a more old-fashioned way of looking at dogs, which is we have to be in charge, we have to be dominant. And we show that we're dominant by making our dog do what we want them to do. And if they don't do it, that's them being dominant. And then, oh my God, before long, they're going to be wearing the pants and, paying the bills and whatever. Yeah. So I think that there's some societal pressure, which, I think is another point that we can talk about in a minute. But I also think that there is this sort of internal conventional wisdom that this is the relationship I'm supposed to have with my dog, that I'm in charge and I say what to do and they do it. And unfortunately, it's the relationship that a lot of people have with the kids too, and I think that it can be reinforcing to feel like you're in control internally, just because it is. And it can be reinforcing to feel like you're in control because that means that you're a good pet owner by those standards.
Yeah. And it also like subdues maybe, like I'm thinking about my relationship to control. A lot of times when I'm trying to control an outcome, there's a fear underneath, right? Like there's a fear like, I didn't do this right. I didn't do this well enough. I'm not the best pet owner, right? Like there is some sort of fear I'm trying to avoid. And then therefore I'm gonna be controlling of the situation, right? And so whether it's like control to avoid feeling a certain way, or whether it is like control to, like you were mentioning, like I need to be in charge, which also comes from a place of fear, right? Like, ooh, what happens when I'm not in charge? Then my dog's, like you said, going to pay the bills. It's like, well, go ahead, let him, right?
Right. But, get a job, please.
Yeah. So it does come from this place of fear, I would imagine.
I 100% agree. And, again, like not to sound like a broken record, but just thinking of it as a parent, I try to approach my relationship with my son in the same way that I approach my relationship with my dogs, as a caregiver and as someone who guides them and helps them learn and learns with them. And the times that I can think of that I don't meet that expectation, where I am super controlling, are always, almost without exception, I can think of, I'm either worried. So it's like, get out of the street right now.
Yeah.
Like you're going to get out of, the times that I snap at him and like demand that he does something are either his safety seems like it's in immediate danger, or other things in my life are out of control and stressing me out.
Totally.
So it's like, oh my God, this
Totally.
blew up at work and I'm having this family drama and I'm stressed about something I read in the news and everything feels like it's completely out of control. And it's like, get in there and clean up your, or whatever.
Yep.
Like it's either when I feel a total lack of control in other aspects of my life, or I'm worried,
or there's
and I
like
feel
high
like
risk.
Yes. And I have to demand compliance, or I feel like I have to demand compliance immediately. Those are the two times that I get really snappy and demanding with my son.
Yeah.
And I think it's human.
Human.
I feel bad about it afterwards, but I also, those instances really help me relate to my clients, because I believe that many times where they're being equally demanding with their dogs, it's coming from a similar place. It's either I feel like things are out of my control and so I have to overcorrect, or I'm really worried about safety and I feel like I have to be extremely harsh to get what I need right now so that I can protect them. Yeah.
I feel like I have to be extremely harsh to get what I want right now. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. That sentence is so resonant in so many areas of my life.
Yeah.
Right? It reminds me of what you said. It's like, well, if I just speak louder and more harsh, then someone will eventually understand me. It's like, well, I don't know.
And I mean, our dogs do the same thing too, though. Like we talk to clients all the time about if the little message doesn't get across, they're going to say it louder. So if you don't pay attention to the lip lick and the whale eye, you're going to start to see teeth, or you're going to hear a growl, or you're going to get a snap.
Yeah.
And that is the dog reacting to things spiraling out of their control, right?
Yep.
So yeah,
control is important to all of us, even though it's like kind of an illusion, but yes, it is.
It totally is.
It's important.
Feeling like we have control and choice is really important.
Yeah.
So, and then the last thing I think contributes to like the importance of obedience, or the concept of obedience to pet owners, at least, and certainly some trainers, is judgment of other people. So like it's performative in a way where it's like, oh, well, I'm going to be perceived as a bad pet owner if I can't make my dog do ABC or whatever. And it reminds me of, and I hate these so much, like every now and then something will make the rounds on social media where it'll be some coercion or punishment-based trainer that's like, I'm doing a challenge, right? And it's like, I'm going to give $10,000 to any positive reinforcement-based trainer that can teach a dog not to chase sheep in a week or something like that, like using only treats and love. Like it's always so hyperbolic. And I think it's like their motivation is to shame trainers who can't like coerce their dogs into doing these things, right? Because if you can't teach dog not to chase sheep in a week using only treats, then you're a bad trainer, you're a bad pet owner or whatever. And so there's this performative aspect of like being judged if your dog doesn't do exactly what you tell them to. And to me, it just puts the focus on the absolute wrong thing. Because the point of working with your dog is not like, oh, well, I can meet these arbitrary milestones and make my dog do what I need them to do. The point is the process and the relationship.
Yeah, it's amazing how we put like the person that's walking down the street, their perspective of whatever it is that we're doing or not doing above the relationship at times. Like it is really interesting. And I'll find myself at times like having those thoughts. I don't react from those thoughts, but like having those thoughts. And I'm like, wow, if I am a behavior consultant, someone that knows what they're doing, I can only imagine, right? Like just the general public being like, ooh, I really, this person needs to know that I'm in control of this dog. And so therefore I'm going to do A, B, and C behavior. Right. So,
and that goes back to fear, like you said, fear of being judged. And I do that as a parent too.
Like,
oh man, like parents are some of the most judgy
I could only imagine.
People, right? Like being judged as a parent is very aversive. And like, happen to not care too much about what other people think about my parenting.
Mhm.
But I still feel it sometimes. And like oh, well, are people going to think my kid is a brat, or are people going to think that blah, 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 whatever. And to be honest, like you said, I have those thoughts. Sometimes I don't generally react from them,
Yeah.
because that actually, it pressures me less than I think it does a lot of other people. But
Yeah.
I it still is a thing that exists. And I think
Yep. It's still that
pet owners.
conditioning. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like that tape recorder is just going on. And we just have to be like, oh, here's the thing. Not going to operate from it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I recognize that. I think that is an influence on pet owners for sure. And
Mhm.
clients tell me, like, oh my gosh, probably 75% of the clients that I do muzzle training with, well, what are people going to think if they see my dog
Yeah,
walking down
totally.
the street?
I'm surprised
What
that's
is my
like
neighbor?
100%.
I think probably 100% of them think it.
That's very true. That's very true. But
But only,
75% ask. Yeah.
yeah, 75, 80% say, oh, well, but what are the neighbors going to think?
Mhm.
What is so and so going to think if my dog is walking down the street with a muzzle on? And generally I'll say, well, they'll think that you're doing everything you can to keep your dog safe.
Yeah. Yeah, there was this woman this morning when I was walking Sully in the park. I was sort of zigzagging, and so she didn't know where I was going, and she was like, "Oh, what direction are you walking?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. My car is right here." She's like, "Because he's not great with large dogs." And I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll give you a wide berth." So I walked around and I turned around. And I was just like, "Hey, thanks so much for your communication. That was so great," or whatever. Because like these people that do the things that we want them to do that are really hard, like
Yeah.
that could have been really hard for her to say, like, "Hey, my dog is not great with other dogs." And
Mhm.
I wanted to be like, "You just killed it, lady. Like, nice work." You know what I mean?
Yes,
I was like,
I
"Oh,
know.
thanks so much for the communication. That was great." And I don't
Yeah.
know, I hope it landed in a way that like she felt supported
Validated or
or
reinforced.
validated or whatever,
Yes,
but like,
yes.
yeah, because that whole engagement with dog owners, like as we're passing,
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff in that
It can get
30
dicey.
second, yeah, in that 30
Yes.
second interaction is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I actually had a really similar interaction recently, where an approaching dog owner said, "Hey, we just need a little bit of space." And I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh,
loud and clear,
brilliant.
"I got you." I was like, "Thank you so much for letting me know."
Yeah,
Like, yeah, no, I know. I always just want to like hug people.
totally. You're like, yes,
Yes, you're doing it right. You're
you're
advocating for your
you're being an
dog.
advocate. Yeah, so great.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, love it.
Well, to wrap up the conversation, what, you know, we're talking about obedience this whole
Mhm.
time, and why are we like, what are we really needing? And we want to rethink this word, rethink this concept. So what's the reframe that we'd like pet parents to adopt?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think looking at obedience through the lens of, and again, when I say obedience, I mean basic manners,
Mhm.
sit down, stay, come, etc., leave it, whatever. Looking at it not as like a rote process that you go through because you're checking things off a list, but as a way to engage with your dog to help them learn how to learn so you can learn how they learn, build a dialogue. And then also, like, as you go to evaluate, like, what am I really teaching these things for?
Yeah.
Like, what's my
Mhm.
goal here? Right.
Mhm.
So that we can dig deeper to the behaviors and skills that are really relevant to us and our dogs and really build and enhance our connection instead of just being something that we do.
Yeah.
Um, and so, as with everything, the language we use is really important. And so, when I'm talking to my clients about asking their dog for known behaviors, I say things like, could you ask your dog to do blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah, instead of like, tell your dog to sit.
Yeah.
Could you ask your dog for a hand target, or saying there's that it's a request instead of a command, or a
Yeah.
cue instead of a command? And cue is a little more like behavior sciencey. So it's sort of like, well, you're telling your dog that there's an opportunity for reinforcement if they do this behavior, which might be a little too jargony for some clients, but
Mhm.
it's a very different connotation than command. So command your dog to sit or cue your dog to sit.
Mm-hmm.
One is do it or else, and one is, hey, could you do this? Here's an opportunity, right? And then thinking about training instead of obedience as like building skills, life skills, or building your partnership or building communication, as opposed to obedience, which again comes with that connotation of the unspoken threat, the or else.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, all of that sounds really great. Just maybe doing an inventory on some of the language that you're using, right? Because like you already gave a few examples in terms of using request and cue versus command, right? Like that language, as we've been pointing out throughout this entire episode, that language is so important because it's going to impact our expectations, our lens that we're seeing things through, and it's going to impact our behavior. And so, I always ask my clients to sort of take a step back and start to notice some of their language. Is it supporting the process or not? Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's important because our language is our thoughts, right?
Yep.
Like most of us say what we're thinking, and our thoughts reflect how we're feeling.
Yep.
And our feelings are influenced by our environment. And so it's all interconnected.
Totally.
I think it works, it works both ways.
It's
so
like cyclical this way, like
yes,
clockwise
it's
and
an Ouroboros.
counterclockwise. Yeah.
Yes. It's the snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think, and we do it in many other parts of our lives, and like listen to any like life coaching, self-help type podcast. And one of the first concepts you'll encounter is like reframe how you talk to yourself, right? Instead of saying like, man, I suck because I didn't get to the gym the 3 times this week that I thought I would, you say, I am so proud of myself for going 2 times this week, right? And though changing how you say something either to yourself or out loud changes how you feel about it and how you approach it. And so I think the language is really important. It can feel really nitpicky. And I think, it gets a bad rap because a lot of people like to say like, oh, well, you're just being PC or whatever, which is a whole other thing. But like, I do really feel strongly that the language we use has an effect on how we think and how we behave. So it's an easy change.
Yeah. And it's not like, putting rose-colored glasses on, right? It's not like, you can absolutely, and I tell my clients this often, like you can have frustration or like real feelings and big feelings about your dog's behavior or the situations that you're in, and you can share them with me or with family or whomever is you feel appropriate. But if you just look at it life through that lens, you're missing other things. And so I definitely think that you can be frustrated. And you can also reframe, right? Like you can say like, gosh, this feels really hard, and I'm really excited that I was able to at least get 2 repetitions in this week, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
There's room for all of it is what we're saying.
I hate toxic positivity.
Yeah.
I hate it. I don't like the respond to everything as if everything's fine and it's the rose-colored glasses. Like I'm not about that at all. Like I'm very realistic, and I think that sort of glossing over everything with this sort of surface positivity does nobody any good. So I completely agree. I think like being frustrated is very real. Feeling overwhelmed is very real. Feeling disappointed with your progress or with your commitment or with where your dog is at, all very real. And like I love dark humor, and like I will be the first to say that like if I'm frustrated with Zip, I'll make a joke about dropping her back off at the shelter. Like,
yeah. As if.
Right. I know I'm not going to do that. And, it's just my way of venting my frustration. She can't understand what I'm saying. So like, I'm not hurting her feelings. And so, I absolutely think like we have to feel and process the bad parts too. But that, when we're in the moment with the good stuff, we want to try to frame what we're doing and how we think about it in a more sophisticated way. So it's not just like, well, I'm doing this to get my dog to do what I want them, what I tell them to do. This is relationship building, and I'm asking them to do this, and I'm asking them to engage. I'm not forcing them to do it. So but I think that's important. But you bring up a really good point. Like, it's not all roses and sunshine. Like, nothing is. Nothing is.
Nothing worth it is, in my opinion. Like
nothing with substance. Nothing with substance is all good all the time. So but we, I think the point is that we're striving to do better, right? We're always just striving to do better. And some days you get there and some days you don't, but then you kind of learn from that, hopefully. And bring the best self you can.
Love it.
So, which I think is what our dogs are always doing. I think they're always bringing the best self that they possibly can. That's not always their very best self.
Yes. It's like everybody is doing the best that they can with the tools that they have at any given moment, including our dogs, including yourselves,
including our dog, including us. Yeah. But I think, if I could boil it down to one takeaway from all of this, it's just that, like, the traditional recipe of, the basic obedience stuff, it's too flat. It doesn't meet our needs anymore. Like, it's too flat. I love that. It's too flat. There's so much more, and our relationship with our dogs is so much more complex than this checklist of skills that we have to have them do. That's
a little bit of a mic drop right there, Ursa. I said at the beginning of the show, I love all things Ursa. Ursa has taught me a lot.
I love you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And where can listeners find you online?
Well, I am working with Behavior Vets of Colorado. It's a veterinary behaviorist practice. And we actually have two practices, one in Colorado and one in New York City. But we serve clients from all over the world, and our focus is on really tough behavior cases. So really complex and difficult behavior issues. And so clients can find me at Behavior Vets Co. That's behaviorvetsco.com. And all of our contact information is there. So that's generally the easiest way to get in touch.
Yeah, they're lucky to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm really lucky to be there.
Yeah, you guys are all just pretty damn amazing. We'll go with that.
That's a big
Everyone's lucky to have everyone.
I know, right? It's just a big gratitude party.
Exactly. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. And this topic was really lovely. So thank you for suggesting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was a blast.